I wanted to almost take away every excuse that a hiring manager would have not to hire me.
Hello and welcome to Off the Books, where we surf the uncharted waters of accounting, finance, risk, and wherever else the waves take us. This episode is brought to you by Workiva, the one platform that brings together financial reporting, ESG, audit, and risk teams for the most peaceful and collaborative of Thanksgiving dinners. My name is Steve Soder, accounting enthusiast and Diet Coke aficionado. I'm looking forward to debating a terrific conversation, and I'm so happy to have you riding along with us. Also, as always, we're very happy to have Catherine Tsai joining us. Catherine, could you please tell everyone about yourself?
Sure, I'm not an accountant or Diet Coke aficionado, but I like drinking venti soy chais and asking questions of smart people like you and our guest, Greg Lucas, the corporate controller at Thermon.
Yeah, absolutely. So Greg got started studying accounting and economics, then got an MBA in finance. So in addition to what he does in his current role, we wanted to ask about his career and what he'd tell people who are coming up through the ranks if they want to become an accounting and finance leader like him. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. Glad to be here.
So, Greg, maybe we could get started by having you share with us your career.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, after I graduated college, I was with KPMG for nearly 4 years doing some M&A activity, doing quite a bit of audits, traveling around the country, and it was a fantastic experience. It really set the foundation for the rest of my career. After KPMG, I went to a smaller company that was a high growth, looking to go public company just in North Houston. I was with those guys for 8.5 years overall. We did take it public in 2007. And then coincident with that transaction, I became the controller and my first public company controller job. I had to implement Sarbanes-Oxley and did all that work for a couple, 2-3 years. Enjoyed that. It was a fantastic experience, learned a tremendous amount across all finance disciplines, and then moved on from there to a large company, Air Liquide, that's Paris-owned, also public, IFRS filer, and that job was just as exciting. Spent time doing shared services roles and high transactions. I spent time overseas. In Tokyo for a while and Shanghai, living there as well. And so got to see a lot of different things while I was at Air Liquide, and then moved on to a couple of other companies. And now I'm very, very pleased to be the corporate controller and vice president at Thermon here in Austin.
It's pretty exciting that your career was able to take you to so many different places.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a tremendous amount of fun to be in a culture and that doesn't necessarily speak English and trying to navigate that and navigate staff. There were Indonesian and Chinese working in Japan, and then dealing with an entire Asia Pacific zone. So the Australians up to all the countries in between there and Japan and China and Indonesia. So it was just really, really fun to be part of that group.
Speaking of different languages and pronunciations, it's pronounced Air Liquide. I realize this will make me sound really stupid, but I've been driving behind one of those trucks and have thought to myself, I wonder how you pronounce that. So I'm a little embarrassed to say that.
Well, even within the company, I think sometimes you may hear folks pronounce it differently. So don't feel too bad, Steve.
Well, one question that I had, because Greg, I've never lived overseas, but have often had to travel overseas for work. Is that something that you would recommend for somebody to actually seek some kind of an international assignment? Oh,
absolutely. I think it gives you a breadth of experience. It's incredibly challenging for someone that's kind of grown up, in American culture to be sort of transplanted and dropped in a completely different culture, completely different language.
For someone who's listening and they want to have a career like yours, what would you say are some of the building blocks for getting there to being able to work internationally, but then also just rise up to be a controller?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've thought about this a lot, as I was younger, wanting to go into business and then eventually wanting to pursue a career in accounting. I thought, okay, let me look at it from a perspective of a company, a job, a hiring manager. If I want to be a CFO one day or a corporate controller, what sort of attributes, what sort of traits, what kind of experience do I need to have to rise to a level of succeeding and making that vision a reality? And so for me, having a CPA, an active CPA license is kind of first on the list. You need to go through that. It's kind of a rite of passage, so to speak. Getting your CPA license and proving that you can go through the exam and get that on your resume, I think is very important. The second thing I would say, and I've got quite a few of these if you're patient with me, is having a Big Four experience. So the Big Four, there is something very special and unique about going through that experience with a large audit firm. They train you. You get to see a very diverse set of clients. You get to see a very diverse set of circumstances. And they train you and bring you up, and you're challenged more than you will be. They almost say for every 1 year or so you're in public accounting is the equivalent of 2, 3, or 4 in industry. And I found that to be incredibly true, because a lot of times, even in industry, you won't see the kind of transactions, the kind of technical issues that you'll see at a Big Four. And so having that on your resume is something that companies look for. Then you've got things like, having a master's degree. I think if you're wanting to move to a level of controller, having a master's degree in accounting, or better yet, an MBA, I think resonates really well, especially if you're, looking into treasury, investor relations, FP&A, forecasting, things like this. I think the MBA will really help ground you in those other disciplines, because you're going to be interacting with a lot of different folks across the organization, operations, HR, and so on. And I think that MBA experience sets you in a different light. There's things too, Catherine, around, going through an ERP implementation. This is important, like a large ERP like Oracle, SAP, NetSuite, Sage. Being able to implement something like that and go through that experience is incredibly challenging. The market values people that have been exposed to and endured, because it's something to endure for sure, a large ERP implementation. Taking a company public, getting public experience, going through an IPO, that's also something that's very valued as well. And then, of course, as you mentioned, having an international rotation to be a part of another culture, it's always been a desire of mine. So I thought through this list, and over my career, I've been intentional about seeking out opportunities. Okay, I get my CPA. Okay, now I've spent some time at a Big Four. Okay, I wanted to get my MBA by the time I was 35, and so went back to school years later to get my MBA, get that grounded, and get that done. So I wanted to almost take away every excuse that a hiring manager would have not to hire me. And so, but part of that has just been the fun of getting that breadth of experience and doing those things over these many years. It's not just a checklist of things to do. It's building the character and technical acumen that you need to excel at a higher level.
Greg, I love the way that you describe that, of taking away any reason somebody would have to not hire me. Because when I talk to new accounting students and they ask me, particularly that question about Big Four, and I want to go back to that in just a second, but that's always my response, is like, well, look, that's going to open up the most opportunity. At this point in your career, do whatever is going to, open that aperture as wide as possible. But we've actually discussed and debated this with a handful of our guests over the years, actually, about that very thing. Do you think it is becoming less relevant, though? Well, I would still agree that on the whole, absolutely would encourage somebody to go in Big Four. Is it less important today than maybe it was previously? Or do you call BS on that notion and say, look, the challenges now that controllers are going to be facing, it's even more important today that you've had that experience?
I think it's still absolutely relevant. It's something that I look for as a hiring manager when I'm bringing people into my organization. If they have that, they're not just a leg up, they're a preferred candidate over someone else. And again, it's because of the exposure you get. And the accounting literature has not been simplified over the years. It's gotten even more complex and more regulatory. And now with ESG and other things going on, it's just having that experience and going through it at the firm is invaluable, I think, if you really want to excel in accounting and have an accounting finance career.
Once I hit my late 30s, I knew I had a serious decision to make. I could either get weirdly into World War II history, learn an absurd amount about wine, or start collecting vinyl records. Since I was never one for memorizing facts, and I think wine is best paired with, well, more wine, I started collecting albums. And yes, dear listener, the feel of a tactile piece of music is great in your hands. And yes, the sound really is warmer with all the pops and crackles underneath as Fiona Apple or Tom Petty warble through my apartment. But record collecting is complicated. First, there's choosing a categorization method. Do you go straight alphabetical or split by genre or year? And what if people you live with don't care about any system, and like a monster, they put Orville Peck's Pony right next to a Tribe Called Quest's low-end theory? Then there's tracking album prices. They can fluctuate more than the stock market. You have to know where and when to buy that Carly Rae Jepsen you've been coveting. I wish there was a Workiva for vinyl. A unified platform to put all that vital financial reporting, ESG, and audit and risk info in one spot, and know what the most up-to-date facts and figures are. Dashboards to help you understand where your albums are by genre and year, and linked numbers and narrative to track a musician's career as they hop through various bands. Wouldn't that be great? Doesn't that sound lovely?
I'm wondering, are there any other sort of intangible things that you look for when you're going about getting a new hire?
Yeah, we talked about the big four. So the people that they seek out and they hire, they also go through a process of scrutinizing individuals. And then those that have been able to last at Big Four for not just, okay, I was there for a year, but to be able to survive and go through that training. It says something about the character, about willing to work hard, and about what they've been exposed to. But that kind of individual that one sought it out, two went through the interview process, and then made it through several years at a Big Four, I think that speaks to kind of who they are and the kind of discipline and kind of work ethic they have. And so again, kind of anchoring back to that, I think it's something that's important. Now, what I look for, I think there's some study out a while back from McKinsey or someone else that kind of seek folks that are slightly insecure because they don't have so much ego that they think they know everything. And so they're willing to work hard. They're willing to jump in, and at the same time, just kind, ethical, hardworking, and bright. Those are kind of the attributes that I like to seek out when I'm seeking an interview.
And Greg, if I could just echo that. So I won't say the company or even the schools, but in the past I've recruited in an area that had several large public universities. Accounting was actually a pretty big program in all of them. And there was one top-rated premier and was like, boy, we really want to get candidates from that school. And ironically enough, we ended up stopping completely moving away from that school because actually of that ego, because the program was so highly rated. They came out of that just assuming that, they knew everything versus I would say some of the alternative schools were equally smart, equally bright. They were just wanting a place where they could go to work, sink their teeth in, and frankly, were just happy for the opportunity. And while I think there's probably a fine balance there, boy, that attitude that's just so apparent. I mean, even after you spend 30 minutes talking to a candidate, generally speaking, it is just crystal clear, like kind of where they're coming from. I just, what you say right there really resonated with my experience back when I was hiring people directly, especially directly out of school.
Yeah. I think back to, my undergraduate degree was from a small private university. And I thought, even back then I did well in school, and, KPMG and EY and Pricewaterhouse, those guys, I thought I'll never, I don't know that I'll ever get hired by one of these guys, but I did very old school, sent in their, resume with a cover letter, got this off to each of the Big Four firms, and I couldn't believe it. But I started getting interviews. I got calls from EY, I got obviously KPMG, and I thought, I realized later in speaking to the partner in charge of recruiting at KPMG in Houston, and he said, we always tend to go towards these particular schools. It's a Baylor, it's a Texas A&M, it's a UT, and he goes, he really prided himself on having a diverse set of candidates from various schools. And your school kind of matters when you're at a Big Four for maybe your first 4 or 5 months. It quickly becomes about what you're able to deliver, and you have to stand on your own work. So school's important, but I would just encourage those that are listening that might be coming from a smaller school, you absolutely can do it. You absolutely can have an amazing career. Don't let anything get in your way. Just seek it out.
Greg, before we go, I'd also really like to ask about what your perspective would be for somebody who is in the middle of their career. Let's say for whatever reason, some of those earlier opportunities that you talked about, whether it's a master's or whether it's Big Four experience, that wasn't in the cards for them, regardless of the reason. But now they're at a point where, hey, I'm really at a point where I career. I love what I'm doing. I love accounting. This is where I want to be. And I really want to become a premier candidate. What would you tell to that person who is beyond maybe those formative years of, being fresh out of college?
Oh, again, I would say, it's not too late. I think it's just like in life, you kind of get out of it what you put into it. And so if you're inundating yourself with, the accounting literature and the Wall Street Journal and staying current on news, and, you're reading and you're at the forefront of these things, you can quickly make yourself valuable, and progress through the ranks, even though you may not have that early experience like someone else.
As we know, job interviews, they go both ways. I'm wondering if you have anything in mind as an interviewer of what you want to portray during the interview to try to convince the candidate to come on board.
Usually what I talk about, several things. First and foremost, the companies that I work for, I'm very passionate about the culture. And at Thermon in particular, we have our care. We care about employees. We're committed to results, and we are passionate about collaborating with one another. And so I think culture, first and foremost, kind of sells. Like if they're interested in a job and you'll get a paycheck, that's okay. But being part of a culture that's unique, that whether it's not politics and you're focused on results and you're focused on bettering candidates, I think that's something I like to portray. And then two, I also like to try to say, okay, what kinds of experiences can I offer you as a candidate coming in? Are we doing a major ERP implementation? Are there, do we have an international rotation? Or we have technical accounting literature that research papers that you could participate in and co-author or author. And so my job is to try to bring folks up with the experiences that someone gave me as I was coming up. So I sell that as part of the interview. I'm here to improve your resume, but I also want to earn the right to keep you. We're going to get stuff done. We're going to have a great time doing it, but I want to see you build and be challenged over the years, just like I was. And then thirdly, if there's opportunities within the organization that I can give you experiences to broaden the breadth of your experience, and discipline, then I try to do that. So for example, if somebody comes into financial reporting, if I see an opportunity that I can get them into internal audit or into FP&A or to treasury or to be a controller for a subsidiary or to rotate and do something internationally, then we try to seek out those opportunities. And I'm just, if they work hard and they're doing an amazing job, and I want to be their biggest advocate to see them succeed in the current role, but not just that, in the next one.
Greg, the advice and the insight that you have shared for us as hosts, but certainly for our listeners, has been fabulous. As we get ready to wrap up, of course, we like to end with a closing question of the day. Clearly, you spent a lot of time interviewing candidates, but I'm wondering if you could think back to when you were the candidate. Could you share what's the wackiest job interview question that you have ever had to answer?
Oh, Steve, that's a good question. I had a company, believe it or not, the question was fairly straightforward. It was from the hiring manager at the end of the interview, and that is, do you want this job or not? And, but preceding that, I went into this place. It was dimly lit. I'm being shuffled around, and he's talking about every now and then I buy the staff a pizza, but there's just piles of reconciliations they're working through, 9-10 hours a day. And I throw them a bone, is kind of what he said. They'd get them a pizza. And then I interviewed with the tax manager. This poor gentleman was melting into his desk, and there's all these papers around the guy, and he's basically telling me, I asked him that question, why do you like working here? Why do you enjoy working here? And he responds back with, oh my gosh, like this place is driving me crazy. I'm not paid enough. I'm working ad nauseum. I'm not able to get anything done. And so finally I make my way back to the hiring manager, and then I get the question, do you want this job? And I just couldn't believe it. I said, I didn't know what to say because I didn't want to lie to him. I said, well, I wouldn't be here if I didn't want this job.
And
good answer.
What's the rest of the story? I mean, did you get the job? How did it pan out? I mean,
well, I was told by recruiters at the time that you never want to decide in an interview whether or not you want the job. Your job is to go through the interview and do everything you can to get the offer. And then when you get the offer, then you think back and you make the decision on whether or not you want to pursue this position. So I think he must have sensed my lack of enthusiasm, because I don't recall getting an offer for that one.
Well, maybe that was a favor based on everything else.
Yeah. Bullet dodged.
Yeah. Catherine, how about you? I know you spent some time in a mean tortilla factory. I'm not sure what that interview process was like, but...
Oh, yeah, it was very simple. I don't think I have any memorable, wacky questions, although I do remember having a boss who said he really wanted to ask people, like, if the interview was just going south, he just wanted to ask, like, what state would you just rip out of the United States? Do you have an answer, Steve?
About what state I would rip out of the United States? Oh, I couldn't.
No, the
couldn't.
wacky.
Good.
The wacky
Okay,
job interview question. We'll get to the state later.
Oh, yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, we can get to the state after we stop recording. I'll tell you what, there is one that comes to mind. We've gotten to the end of the interview. It went quite well. So you get to the interview, you sort of have a vibe or a feeling of how things are going. That was one where I just felt like, man, like I crushed it. Like I was feeling really good. And the interviewer looks at me and is like, it's just one final question. It's like, yeah, please go ahead. They're like, what are you doing for dinner? I'm like, what? wait. Hold. I'm sorry. What's happening right now? Turns out I had made some comment about like getting into cooking or something like that at the beginning of the interview. And I think they were trying to clumsily like, oh, what do you plan to cook tonight or that kind of thing. But naturally, when I had heard that question, that was not immediately what I was thinking they were getting at, which, gave a split second of awkwardness. Fortunately, we pulled through that. And anyway, I did end up getting an offer at that company. But that to me was probably the weirdest, Catherine, for my part.
Oh, Steve.
And it's never happened again, so don't need to worry about that. Greg Lucas, corporate controller at Thermon, thank you so much for sharing the insights. Seriously, I think what you had to share is incredibly valuable and important, and hope the audience really take it to heart. Thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I kind of want to study accounting now so I can come work for you, Greg. But thank you, dear listener, for surfing along with us. I'm Catherine Tsai. You heard Steve Soder. This has been Off the Books, presented by Workiva. Please subscribe, leave a review, and tell your buddies if you liked the show. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a note in the comments, or feel free to drop us a line at offthebooks@workiva.com. Surf's up, and we'll see you on the next wave.